Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of Winona. Today we're in the First Congregational Church. This beautiful church has the distinction of being Winona's first organized church. Today we're going to meet with the current minister and find out the history of this church. We're also going to take a tour and discover the aesthetic beauty of the church, and we're going to partake in some of the activities of their sesquicentennial celebration. At this time, Reverend Rick King, who is the current minister of the First Congregational Church. Hi, Rick.
Hi, good to be
doing?
here.
Is it all right if I call you Rick?
You betcha.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Now tell me, you've been in Winona for maybe 6 or 7 years as the minister, correct?
Yep, since the summer of 1998.
Okay, so you've had plenty of time to learn the history of this church, I imagine.
Yes, and the place really just oozes history. You walk into the building and it's filled with probably some ghosts and lots of stories and lots of years of history here in Winona.
Well, let's go way back to the beginning. Now, tell me how this church got organized and when it got organized.
Well, in 1853, there were 18 residents of Winona, which was then about 300 people. It was just a wide spot in the riverside. Got together and began meeting together first in a private home and then in various small halls. Much as new church starts happen these days. You know, you meet in borrowed space first. And pretty soon, by around the late part of the 1800s, the church had grown to the point where they were ready to build a building. And they built the first frame structure at 2nd and Franklin, kind of close to where Godfather's Pizza is now. Mm-hmm. And then later on, they built a second frame structure that was situated where Midtown Foods is located right now. And then in 1880, this building was started at Broadway and Johnson and was completed the following year. And the first group to occupy the building was the Sunday school. And so, it's really been kind of a progression from a very, very small band of people. And the church essentially grew with the community as it became the busy lumber town that it was, and then on into the 20th and then the 21st century.
So who was the person that initiated the church back in 1854 or 1853?
A guy who has a wonderful middle name, Hiram Sumatra Hamilton. I'm a coffee lover, and anybody who's named for a coffee, he's noted for his stamina mm-hmm. and his ability to go out into the frontier, coming out from New England, as many of the early settlers did, into what was still a territory and not yet a state. And he was here to establish the church after the organizational phase had kind of come to completion, and the church got its foundation and its start under his leadership.
Well, Rick, let's establish first off what the First Congregational Church is exactly. How does it differ from other Christian churches?
Well, Joyce, Congregationalists are descended from the Puritans or the Pilgrims. And so we had our origins in England in a break away from the Anglican Church, the Church of England, because the Puritans, the ones who were separating for issues of religious liberty. They didn't believe that the King of England should tell them how they should organize, how they should worship, and how they should be church together. And so from our earliest roots, before coming to the United States with the Pilgrims landing at Plymouth Rock in 1620, there's been a real spirit of individualism and fierce independence. And that really continues to this day. All congregations in the United Church of Christ, which is our denomination, are locally autonomous in that each church makes its own decisions about how it organizes itself, what stands it takes on a range of issues, including such things as biblical interpretation, positions on social issues, those kinds of things. So in that respect, they're not different from the Baptists, for instance, who were also separatists, people who sought local autonomy and the ability of one local church to make its own decisions. led by the Holy Spirit. So that's one of the real hallmarks of Congregationalism. Beginnings in New England were also combined later with a group of independent Protestants called the Christian churches that were attempting to reclaim the earliest roots of Christianity, and they too were locally autonomous. So they joined forces with the Congregationalists at a certain point in the 1900s, and then later combined with a couple of other smaller denominations that were more Lutheran in flavor to form the denomination called the United Church of Christ, which is what we're part of today. And that's a denomination of about 1.4 million members.
Well, Rick, what is so special about your congregation?
I would have to say that, well, we have a core of people who've been lifelong Congregationalists or lifelong UCCers. Mm-hmm. We also probably tend to pick up more people who are formerly from other denominations, people who may have left one tradition that they grew up as children, maybe a branch of Lutheranism or the Catholic Church, or maybe a more conservative tradition. And they find a home here, I think, because of the openness and the inclusivity of our theology. Because the character of each local church can really rise up out of the people. It's not so much a top-down, this is what you have to believe, but it's here's how we are together, and here's how we treat each other, and here's how we live out our faith. So I think we tend to get maybe a little bit more diverse group than even other mainline Protestant traditions like Methodism or Presbyterianism. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of a diverse, heady, and exasperating mix of people. And people who are part of other traditions that may be more top-down or have you sign off on a list of beliefs wonder how we stay together. But I think overall in most Congregational churches, there's a real commitment to the process of working things out and coming to consensus and making decisions as a local body.
Rick, let's talk about the church itself now, the physical beauty of this wonderful church. Tell me first, let's talk about the sacristy, the room that we're in right now. Tell me about the organ, the furniture, the windows.
Well, the sanctuary is laid out in a more of an amphitheater seating format. If you look at it from the street, you can see that the building is more square than it is long. A lot of churches have one central aisle. We have 5. Some churches have a very long back to front, narthex to nave measurement. We have a relatively short one. The seating is much more in a kind of a fan shape. The ceiling is high and arched, which makes the acoustics in the space ideal for both the spoken word and for music. And the organ sounds wonderful in here. And essentially, if you took it out of this particular building, it would change the sound of the organ. It's the two are kind of married to each other.
The organ was installed in the church in 1929 for a cost of $20,000. It is a Cassavant Opus 1340, given to the church by Francis Bell and Maud Prentice in honor of their father, lumber baron William Laird. Today, this one-of-a-kind organ is worth well over $1 million. It is a wind instrument which includes exceptional tones and interesting sounds. In the front of the church are the brass pipes, exposed in a lovely design reaching up towards the heavens. And at the back of the church are a section of pipes within the walls known as the echo. These interesting pipes were featured when local organist John Mullock played during the sesquicentennial celebration.
Improvisation by Paul Mons, and then the final piece in that section would be an arrangement of the holly and the ivy, and that will feature the echo division of the organ, which is located in the rear of the church, and that includes the chimes and the harp, and the chimes would be on your right, and the harp would be on your left.
looking at the facade of the organ, which is the section that includes those gold pipes, the whole facade was actually donated, salvaged from a Chicago church that was burned up in a fire. And the chancel area in that church was all that was left. It fits beautifully with the choir loft area and the carved wood up front that you see if you're sitting in the congregation. The wood itself is very intricately carved, and actually the carving that was done for First Congregational Church, which is further down, right below, it's the front of the choir loft, really matches well the carving on the facade. It looks like the two were made for each other, when in fact the facade came from another church.
Amazing.
And the pipes, the gold pipes that you see in the facade are just that. They're not functional pipes. The real working pipes are behind that, in an area that's accessible from a couple of closet doors out in the halls outside the sanctuary. And then the rest of the organ goes down into the basement of the church, and then there are a couple of what are called echo organ chambers at the back of the sanctuary that are also wind-driven and part of the same organ. They just are located at the back. So it was an early version of surround sound, I think, or home theater. The other thing, too, is being a church that was built by many of the lumber families in the community, the Lairds and the Nortons and the Bells and so on. The wood was specially cut, cured, and milled, and some of the carving work is just amazing in here. It's walnut, stained darker, but it's still lighter than mahogany. And the tone seems to match, and I don't know whether this was planned. I mean, people knew their wood back in those days, but it's not too dark in contrast to the rest of the space. Combination of the dark wood, some of the arts and crafts style design features of things like the pews or the lighting fixtures, and the high ceiling, and then just the wide open seating pattern make for a really warm, inviting place to worship. And the nice thing is, you can feel an intimacy. When I preach, I come down front and I preach often without notes, and there's a real sense of connecting with people, because even if you're in the back row, you're never very far away. So there's this feeling of family. And the other thing is, too, it's a space that is great for weddings for the same reason. You feel like you're surrounded by the people who come to your wedding.
Let's talk now about your stained glass windows. For instance, the rose window behind us.
Well, it's a scene of Jesus holding one of the children, and he's surrounded by children. And it's from that passage in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's a story shared by all of them where Jesus' disciples try to shoo the children away when they come up and sit in his lap, because they don't want the children to bother him. He's teaching right now. And he says to his disciples, wait a minute, don't let them come to me, because to these children belongs the kingdom of God. And so this window is, it would be appropriate enough, in a church that can, sometimes seem very adult because it's a very formal space. But we have the reminder in the rose window that Jesus welcomes little children. And I get to look at that window every single Sunday. And when I give a children's sermon, I look up there and I'm reminded of how integral the little kids especially are to the life of our church. That window was given as a gift to the church when this building was built, bought by the offerings the Sunday school had made over the years leading up to the building of the building. So it was really appropriate that window was purchased with their funds, and that they were the first group to occupy the new building in 1881 when we took possession of it after it was built for us.
Very fitting. And let's talk about the two side windows, the east and the west windows.
They're actually a form of glass that stained glass purists would say it's not exactly stained glass. There's a way in which the coloring is laid on top of frosted glass, and then there's translucent panes that have leaded scenes or seals in them. Each of them has a biblical passage down at the bottom, and they're reminders of the importance of worship. One of them is, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." which really bespeaks the open, welcoming tone of Jesus, which we try to model, and which other churches do too. But I think it's a reminder to us, because if you walk past that window, you see that one. I think that Scripture put in an artistic piece like an icon or a window or some other fixture in a church takes on a life both of its own and one that's really integral to the whole space. It's part of who we are, because architecture really shapes the worshiping community in a church.
Well, Rick, I know this is not the only room in this church. You've got a wonderful room that you call the fireside room in the back of the church.
That's right.
Let's go there. I bet you there's some good, unusual things that you might want to talk about there.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's a very, very special room in our church.
Okay, let's go take a look.
Joyce, we're walking into the fireside room, which is really the meeting place for after worship, and it's unique in that it's got a skylight, so there's lots of natural light, a huge fireplace that just begs for a Yule log. Ordinary logs just get vaporized in that fireplace, but it's used actually during the winter on Sundays during our fellowship hour after worship, and it's a wonderful place to be because it's like a huge living room that has lots of character, and the light, particularly from the south in the winter, comes through the windows, and it's just a really, really wonderful place to be. And we do all kinds of stuff here. We have forums. Yesterday we had a meeting of the Winona Area Poverty Roundtable here. We have committee meetings at a meeting table in one of the corners. We have a seating area with sofas and easy chairs and things like that for small groups to meet. And then we also have a library area. And it's all off of the larger, more open space with the really high ceiling.
And I know your church is very generous in offering it to organizations to come and use it for their benefit.
That's right, yeah. And we just feel, I think it's a way of exercising our responsibility and our gratitude to Winona for, enabling us to be here.
The Reverend Hiram Hamilton was paid $100. I paid that much for medicine 24 hours ago. And the number was only 6. I got 6 pills for $100. Numbers. But they're working already, I can tell. His sermons were carefully prepared and were delivered with force and sincerity. In 1856, a meeting house was erected on the southwest corner of 2nd and Franklin at a cost of $4,000, including the lot. And the church was dedicated. Thank you so very much for the invite to come back on such a special weekend as we celebrate 150 years of being who we are.
Joyce, one of the things about this room is it also is surrounded by a balcony. The upper half was built some years after the lower half. The Sunday school classrooms are on the balcony, as are my office, the secretary's office, and a conference room classroom that we use for Bible study. And then the nursery is down at the far end. And all of them get a lot of natural light. They're very far cry from a church basement. At the east end of the fireside room, there's a little door that leads into the Laird Chapel. And it has lots of beautifully carved wood, and it was given as a gift by the Laird family. Do you want to see it?
Oh, I'd love to see it. Let's
Okay.
take a peek. This is a lovely little chapel. I can just see a wedding in here. It's just so nice and intimate.
Yeah. It only seats about 50 people, and that's if they're tightly packed together. But it's an intimate space. There's no need for amplification. Back behind the screen, there's actually an organ that can be played, and so we've had small memorial services here. We've had in the past, it's been used for small weddings. And it's a space that has some of the most beautiful windows in the entire church. The stained glass here was part of the gift of the Laird family. And the wood is Appalachian oak, harvested from the East Coast in the Appalachian Mountains, given by the Laird family. And it's a lot lighter in color than the very dark wood that we have in the sanctuary. So it's a nice contrast. And although the windows, because they have a lot more color, don't let in as much light, the room itself is bright and cheery and doesn't feel closed in at all, even though it's a very small chapel. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful little space. And I guess the term, if somebody was doing a little travelogue, they'd say it's a gem. These were given by the Laird family, and they were commissioned from the Willett studio in Philadelphia. And Willett was a disciple of Mr. Tiffany, who pioneered the art glass movement of the 1800s. And one of the hallmarks of those windows is that because they made their own glass and they exercised quality control over the coloring, the texture, any fillers, any drawings on top of them, they really are works of art. And each of these windows is centered on a particular biblical theme, like baptism. And each of them has 3 panes that have stories illuminating different aspects of that particular theme. And they're called lancets just because of the shape of the window. They're wonderful because they have a lot of blue. They don't let in a lot of light, but the light that comes in is refracted through the colors, and you can see the drawings on top of some of the frosted glass pieces very, very clearly. And one of the most wonderful things in the world is to walk in on a sunny morning, because these windows face east, and not turn the lights on, and just look at the detail in the windows. The Orthodox tradition has icons. We have stained glass windows. And it's just a wonderful chance to calm down from the pace of a day, or to get ready for a day, or to take time out in whatever way you want to.
Rick, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed the tour. The church is absolutely charming. And these windows are equally as charming, and this room is just truly a gem.
Well, thank you. It's been wonderful to share First Congregational Church with you and with the people of Winona.
Well, and good luck with your 150th celebration ongoing.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
And thank you so much for joining me today. Please join me again next week. Till then, enjoy the Spirit of Winona.